Ben kendi Instagram hesabımdan canlı nasıl yapabiliyorum onu? Bilmiyorsun değil mi? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you on our panel on the future of Libya. Welcome once again. Today we are going to discuss the current situation in Libya and the future scenarios in Libya. We have four distinguished speakers with us today. Mr. Talha Köse from SETA Foundation. He's a researcher at SETA Foundation and also a teacher, a lecturer at the Khaldun University in Istanbul. We have Jalel Harchaoui. He's from the Clingendael Institute and his work focus is on Libya. We have also with us Mr. Enes Gomati. He's the founder and director of the Sadeq Institute, the first public policy think tank established in Tripoli. And also we have Ahmed Sewehli, and he is a psychiatrist and British Libyan activist. During the past few months, he has been involved with international media about the situation in Libya. So we have together with us two Libyans, but also one Turkish researcher and one also from, I think, Mr. Harchaoui is Algerian origin. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to start with Mr. Harchaoui. And I would like to ask you, the situation, I mean, in Libya seems a little bit complex today. After Turkey's also involvement, the situation has changed dramatically, and that's quite obvious. But what do you see the future of Libya? I mean, there are many talks that there is no military solution to the conflict, that there has to be some kind of political solution. But what this political solution might be? So what do you think is the future scenarios, possible scenarios in Libya? And I would like to give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very honored by the invitation, so thank you very much for that. I'm going to effectively today just give a few structural considerations so that we kind of build the context within which the short-term future is probably going to unfold. We cannot know which direction, obviously, but there are a few things that we kind of we have the ability to kind of delineate and identify. I would like to start with this relationship between Russia and Turkey. This is obviously a very important change of the last several years, although 5 years ago, Russia was already playing a small role and Turkey was already playing a small role. There's no real new addition in terms of the states playing some kind of conducting some kind of an action that influences the conflict. For instance, 5 years ago, it was already possible to determine that one of the dynamics that was pulling Russia into the Libyan conflict was the conservative Arab regimes, the UAE and more importantly Egypt at the time. Those were the actors actually encouraging Russia to kind of do in Libya what it was already doing very visibly in ways that were really noticed in the Arab world in Syria. So the only reason we've had so many big changes is effectively the belief, the strong belief on the part of those states that the West is not to be taken seriously, because the West seems determined not to get involved militarily, even very close to Europe, Northern Africa, and also I think in terms of how they think about that area, if you want to understand the attitude of most Western states, including the US and France, is that they believe that they can actually outsource the area to somebody. And for many years, the belief was that the UAE was going to be able to do a fantastic job managing that area. So now that all these things have become visible in a spectacular way, a lot of voices are trying to speculate on the nature of the relationship between Russia and Turkey. So if you listen, let's say, to US diplomats, you would really believe, it would have you become convinced that Russia and Turkey are deep mortal enemies. And sometimes when you have moments of coordination, like this extremely meaningful, day on the 22nd of May, where you saw in broad daylight something like 2,200 or 2,500 roughly Russian mercenaries move from Tarhuna to Bani Walid. In those moments of coordination, you have the other extremes. A lot of people start talking about like this very well choreographed coordination between Russia and Turkey. They say those states are going to only converge in the future. And in fact, they're only pretending in Libya. In reality, those are friends, deep friends, intimate friends. The reality is obviously neither of those versions. What we have is effectively two states that are indeed acting as rivals in various spaces, whether it's Syria or Libya. But at the same time, they're just too clever and too realistic to forget that the connection that links them is valuable to both of them. So the net result is that you have a channel within which they would like to continue operating based on the use of violence and an actual rivalry to try to win more territory as opposed to less territory. So you do have some kind of adversarial kind of competition, but it's not full-blown enmity. And the net result is that it basically oscillates. It oscillates between moments of clear, visible coordination, and sometimes you have incidents and slippages and accidents like we've had in Idlib in late February of this year. And it's going to continue like this because, as I said, the tradition that both states kind of embody right now, and we can see it in Libya very clearly, is the tradition of realism. And realism is not very much in vogue in Western capitals. It's a way of thinking that it's very difficult for a policymaker to make a decision in France or Washington or even Berlin based on the principles of realism. So that was basically what I wanted to start with, is the connection that exists between Russia and Turkey. It should not be exaggerated, but it should not be ignored either. And I think when you read the press, you have a lot of very incorrect ways of depicting this. Another thing that I would like to say about Russia, why, for example, me, I keep insisting on the fact that some US media, for instance, when they describe Marshal Haftar, they call him Moscow's man, or the first backer that they mention is Russia. So it's the Russian-backed marshal as opposed to the Emirati-backed marshal. And I'm deeply against it because analytically it's extremely misleading. But so their response, of course, is that the mercenaries exist, and the Wagner mission actually played a role, and it really helped hurt a lot of Libyans, and it made a difference. And the offensive lasted much longer because of that Russian entity that couldn't have been deployed in Libya without the green light of the Kremlin. But at the same time, it's not the Kremlin. So this is something that I wanted to kind of make a few remarks on. The one thing that I would like to say is that if you go back to the decision that Vladimir Putin made in May 2012, when he became president again after 4 years of being prime minister with no say on foreign policy, when he came back, one of the first decisions that he made was that Russia was going to stage a very wide comeback across all of the Middle East and North Africa region. And that actually had been attempted in the years 2005, 2008. Russia at the time was much smaller from a GDP perspective, and the US influence was much stronger. But we could see, you know, if you study the behavior of Russia in Libya and Algeria, and even in Syria, you have a lot of indications of how they think, and the thinking has been exactly the same. So that is interesting because it allows you to determine that the current Russian policy is certainly not a reaction to the Arab uprisings at all. The thinking is structural and it's strategic, and it's meant to be valid over a period of 30 years. But in May 2012, Putin made the decision that he was going to play, that Russia was going to now be a meaningful player across the Middle East. If you think about it, that is absolutely impossible if you are not very intimately close to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Those two Gulf states, and even to some extent, you could say the same about Qatar, simply because it's very wealthy. You cannot remember, for example, that Saudi Arabia killed a lot of Russians in the 80s. You have to make a strategic decision that you're going to really cultivate the friendship of those states. So when in 2019, a request was made by the backers of Haftar, because Haftar has no money. He's not a treasury. There's no source of wealth that he can actually use and make strategic decisions using that money. So when the request popped up in the summer of 2019 that he needed help, Russia decided to say yes, because saying no to this would have meant that it was going to hurt its supposed friendship with the Gulf states, and also it would lose the opportunity to increase its political influence in Libya. So that's very interesting, because we can also document the fact that Russia always knew that the offensive into Tripoli was a bad idea, that it was not. We were talking about realism earlier. It was not realistic. So this is something that I wanted to kind of say again. Everything that we've seen on the part of Russia so far has been pure parasitic opportunism, just to carve itself out into the Libyan life and Libyan politics, whether it's the East or the West, and particularly the East, obviously, because since last month now, Russia is absolutely necessary for the survival of those structures in Eastern Libya. It's not sufficient necessarily, but it's necessary, and being so vital is immediately converted into political influence. Regarding the Libyan or the indigenous dynamic in the East, I would like to speak about the East here. A lot of there's one comment that I've heard from just paying attention to the Turkish media, is that at some stage, I think some Turkish official said that Turkey would like to have Haftar replaced with Aguila Sarah. And this is for me, first of all, I think that the process that was already being fueled by Russia was already going in that direction. So saying it out loud is not necessarily going to accelerate it. On the contrary, you could have a backlash, because now you have this prideful reason to maintain the visibility of Marshal Haftar, who we all know doesn't have any political power the same way as he did until a couple of months ago, but he's still there visibly. And just asking for him to leave is a good enough reason for them to maintain him. But I would like to also question the notion of a replacement. There's no replacement of Marshal Haftar, because replacing him, it means that you basically go look for another individual with who would concentrate in his hands as much power as he did, and that is exactly the wrong conclusion from the last year. That only led to defeat and catastrophe and disappointment, and after huge expenditures of money. What we are witnessing now, and it's not necessarily obvious, is that the two backers of the LNA, because here we have to distinguish the LNA from Haftar, are in the business of reducing the political power of the marshal, and then flather other individuals and Nagila Salah is certainly not meant to replace Haftar. It's just the idea is to give him more importance, to flatter the tribes of northern eastern Libya, and gradually be able to introduce and revive Gaddafist figures. And it's not going to be one Gaddafist figure. It's not going to be one Gaddafist superstar or diva like Haftar tried to be. It's going to be probably a boring technocrat, you know, an intelligence officer who's going to look after the intelligence, and maybe somebody else to be the prime minister, and so on and so forth. And that's the process we're going to see. It's going to be like a diversification of risk in the form of a collegial kind of dynamic. And by the way, the exact same thinking is being pushed by Russia in Syria. They do not want an all-powerful Assad anymore. They want maybe keep him as like this figurehead, but they still would like to dilute his power. And the same thinking is operating in eastern Libya, and this is going to continue. The other thing that I would like to finish on is like another Libyan issue in terms of the actors on the ground, is those mass graves that were discovered in Tarhuna. I think that I would, you know, you could already understand what kind of spin is going to be used by people who would like to still be able to speak about this atrocity and not be accused of ignoring it, but at the same time you spin it in a way so that you can there's no conclusion to be drawn from it, politically speaking. So what they're going to do is effectively say that those killings were already happening before April 2019, and technically this is true. I mean, the Kaniat, this very powerful and fearsome militia in Tarhuna, was already known for this practice that consisted in liquidating entire families and killing women, killing kids, and killing any kind of political dissident. But what matters is that we need to think a little bit about what happened after April 2019. Of course, the practice existed before, but it could have only accelerated after April 2019. And this is an analytical point, if you want, that really matters a lot, because already when you look at the reaction of foreign states, especially the Western states, you already see that both parties are put at the same level. So I'm here saying this about specifically the doing of you know, those mass graves and corpses found in a morgue in Tarhuna. This happened in great part during the last 14 months. And it happened the way, you know, the reason it happened so fast and in ways that could not have been condemned or even known about is because of all the diplomatic protection that was deployed to protect not Tarhuna particularly, but everything related to the offensive, because the offensive had to continue and it could not be condemned. So I just wanted to finish on this Tarhuna thing, because it's one big issue among many others, and when it comes to that, it's pretty clear what kind of presentation is going to be used to be able to kind of like brush it off and say that there's going to be an investigation. The investigation is going to last another 4 years. Everybody will have forgotten about it anyway. And in the meantime, you present both camps in the same way. And that is incorrect, because we know that during the last several months, particularly, all those practices, even though they existed before April 2019, could have only be resorted to on a more frequent basis. So I think this, one last thing before I end, regarding what is happening in Tripoli and Tripolitania in general, I still believe that there's an extraordinary, probably too intense sense of victory. And that is going to translate very soon into the body language of various politicians and ambitious characters. We are going to see a new face, and I don't even think that it's going to be a return of what we could have seen maybe 2 or 4 years ago. It's going to be a new face of this new Libya that will have this feeling, correct feeling of being less vulnerable. It's better protected now because of this historic presence, presence on the part of the Turkish mission. But I think I'm still a little bit worried about the competition, about the reappearance of old fault lines between the various factions and those fault lines were much less visible during the war simply because of the threat. So here, I think there's nothing really surprising that is going to happen, except that it's probably going to be even more intense than some people might anticipate. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this excellent analysis, Mr. Harchaoui. Now I would like to continue with Mr. Enes Gomati. You have listened to this analysis. I mean, the role of Russia and Haftar's crimes in Libya, especially in Tarhuna. So, also as a Libyan, I mean, how do you see the current situation? And I mean, in Libya, and what do you see the future of Libya? I mean, how is there any solution? Possible solution for this, or some talks about there are some talks about the division of Libya into 2 entities. These kind of scenarios also are discussed. Do you see this as a possibility, or do you see other scenarios for Libya? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Enes, and thank you also to yourself and to the SETA team for the very kind invitation today. So it's a really interesting question that you've asked, and I mean, from the ground up, I wouldn't be able to do justice to to give gravitas really to the degree to which this last year, April 4th, has changed so much on the ground. Tripoli didn't really witness a very intense battle. In 2011, Muammar Gaddafi relinquished control of Tripoli and abandoned it, and went to Sirte, where he was found carrying a drain pipe. Khalifa Haftar sort of launched not his first attempt at taking Tripoli. He attempted twice in 2014, February 14th in the Valentine's Day coup that wasn't, where he fled to Benghazi, and then 3 months and 1 day, 91 days later, on May 15th, 2014, where he refurbished this and rebranded it as a war on terror, Operation Dignity, where he launched again another coup, and attacked the elected parliament in Tripoli, but failed and sparked a civil war instead. So this isn't the first or the second, it's the third time. It might be his last, given that it's been over a year now. And it tells us a lot about, the dynamics on the ground. So number one, in terms of the armed groups and the coalescence and the constellation of groups inside Tripoli that moved to defend the GNA or to fight and die against Haftar, depending on how you see it, those groups have now built new relationships between them. Some of them have overcome previous problems. Some of them have created new problems amongst one another. But for the most part, there are new constellations, new groups, new coalitions that have been formed, depending on the different axes, depending on the different front lines, and just depending on the different kind of camaraderie that is built on the front lines. And that's just the armed groups. In terms of Tripoli itself and the residents, talking about the most densely populated part of Libya, around 3 million people that live in Tripoli and the surrounding areas. Without necessarily trying to speak on the behalf of Libyans, I wouldn't dream of doing that. But there is always a constellation of people that sit on the fence, so to speak. The silent majority, as they're often called, that have looked at Libya, have looked at the various iterations of problems, the 3 civil wars in 9 years, and have thought to themselves, what could Khalifa Haftar offer? We've heard different things. He's had campaigns in the east of the country. He's had campaigns in the south of the country. On April 4th, they kind of got their own taster of what that campaign would look like. And instead of just being this drab, boring, over-recycled, clinical analysis that I could give, let me give you an idea of kind of the way that conflict really emerges on the ground. We talk about numbers. 200,000 to 400,000 have been displaced in Libya. Many of those came, and that displacement came specifically towards the end of this campaign during a lockdown and a pandemic, a global pandemic, when people were supposed to be safe in their homes and lost their homes. Many of those that were living in the southern suburbs of Tripoli were already displaced from a previous conflict in Benghazi and Derna in the east of the country 4 years ago. So it doesn't always tell the story, it doesn't always give you a really accurate picture. And despite the fact that that war might be over, Tripoli still has an absence of water. Water was cut from Tripoli around the time, or affiliated forces and political forces to Haftar cut the water on Tripoli around the time of the pandemic. And then you have, even though Haftar's forces have retreated, you still find that those that are returning to their homes from shelters that were bombed by Haftar's forces in May of this year, those that are returning are finding it booby-trapped, and we see landmines that are killing civilian lives today. So it gives you an idea of the kind of legacy that Khalifa Haftar has left behind. I think it's highly unpalatable, very, very difficult to be able to sell a possible kind of configuration of forces today, given how polarizing Haftar is. He really is the Marmite of Libyan politics. He really is, you either love him if you're, particularly from his patronage network in Eastern Libya, or you hate him and vilify him. He's not someone that, when you ask a Libyan, what do you think of Haftar? It's not like they don't have an opinion. So, in those terms, it's very difficult because he's not a consensus figure. It's very difficult to bring him into the center of a political discussion or mediation and expect there to be happy faces or smiles like we saw in Sirte 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, almost, when the UN brokered the last deal. I don't know whether or not we're going to have those handshakes, those signatures on pads of paper, or if we can return to a normalization of Haftar after this last year of the conflict. So from a perspective of a Libyan perspective, let me just answer that question in a nutshell. There is no Libyan perspective because Libyans come in multiple shades, multiple ideas, and it's not, there's no one idea of what it means to be Libyan or one view of Haftar today. But that tells you enough that because there is no one view and he's so polarizing, it's very difficult to rehabilitate Haftar. But the reality is that Haftar, given the conflict, is really unimportant. And I say that for a number of reasons. But the most important thing is he is a reflection, really, of his backers and the strength of his backers. Khalifa Haftar is not the, without necessarily being too insulting, he's not the most competent of people in Libya. He's been around for now 51 years in Libyan politics. In his 46th year, he launched a coup on YouTube. He's the first individual in history to attempt to launch a coup, on a social media channel. And so he's not the most competent of people, but he's a really interesting character because he's worked for around 7 different states in half a century. There is no one on planet Earth, let alone Libya or North Africa and the Middle East, that has worked for that many states, been involved in that many coups, and is still around today and spoken about in terms of, well, do we like him or do we not like him? Does he have a future? In any other place, this person would have been behind jail, behind bars. So I find it I do find it fascinating and funny to speak about people like that. I think, not to try to paint any kind of moral equivalence, people should be judged by their behavior, not by their surname or by who they're supported by or how strong they are. But we're finding a lot of difficult kind of conversations amongst European diplomats, amongst Western diplomats that silently kind of pushed Haftar or gave him a green light, like John Bolton did in DC on April 10th after a phone call. Sorry, April 4th after a phone call with the Department of Defense, and he was given a discreet green light to launch an attack and was told to make it quick. Now, there is a problem with how to rehabilitate Haftar, but the reality is that Haftar is not important to his backers. After judging and taking off from what Jalal said about Aqil Salah, Aqil Salah plays, as the as the Speaker of the Parliament, he plays in the minds of Europeans and Western diplomats, or at least Russia and the UAE, who support him. He plays an interesting role in that he has democratic currency behind him. The House of Representatives was the last democratically elected, even though it was by a minority, it was democratically elected. The problem with the HOR, and something that we often forget about, is that it was constitutionally invalid. The Supreme Court in Libya found it to be constitutionally invalid because a businessman in the UAE, Hassan Tatanaki, paid for the move of that parliament to a tribally controlled town, Tobruk, where it became under the control of tribalist, federalist forces that were very closely, militarily speaking, aligned to Haftar's campaign in eastern Libya. So in a sense, not only is this democratic currency kind of elusive and not really existent, it's contested, but also we kind of understand a bit more about the configuration of what Haftar is, and a bit more about the configuration and the role that someone like Ageda Salah plays. And again, to give a real kind of harsh and maybe a bottom line with this, Khalifa Haftar, like I said earlier on, he's as strong as his military backers make him. But in terms of what he commands on the ground, the forces that came into Tripoli that were running the show in the last several months from November onwards were deployed for a number of reasons. Russians were better than fighting it than some of the forces that Haftar had, the local forces. They were less of a lag on the supply chain, but they were also autonomous. You know, these guys are seasoned veterans in insurgencies and in fighting wars all over the world, and Haftar exported and outsourced, or rather his backers outsourced the fighting to Russian mercenaries, to Syrian mercenaries, to Emirati deployed Sudanese mercenaries. So the front line and the rank and file were not controlled by Haftar or his men. And then number two, the drones from the sky were not controlled by Haftar or his men. They were the UAE that were it was the UAE that has been controlling those drones from eastern Libya and central Libya since 2014. So in terms of what Haftar commands, and intriguingly and very interestingly, when they had enough, either the Russians or the Emiratis, that was enough for Haftar. It was over for him. He might have been the last to know about it. And I think in that sense, it tells you a lot about what Haftar is. Haftar is not really needed. He's sort of plausible deniability, in a sense, for the UAE and Russia to act in Libya. I think in terms of what they may want to be selling is someone that will happily parrot their narrative, but he offers no unique capabilities, no unique thinking, and absolutely none of the ingenuity, given his track record in Libya and history of military failure. This is his third attempt at time of taking Tripoli in 6 years. He has nothing that he offers his backers, you know, apart from a series of failures to acquire things by force. So he's not the strong man that they desired. He was strong enough if they made him strong enough. And so in that sense, it's been a critical failure for them. And they've had to look at alternative solutions. They may move on from Haftar. They may move to eastern Libya and draw a line in the sand and preserve what they have in eastern Libya. But even then, it kind of begs the question about the Libyan National Army or the Libyan Arab Armed Forces and their combination and their coalition. That's also not an army. That's not an army that Haftar was able to mobilize and deploy with its full force to Tripoli. That is a Libyan National Army, or an army, in a sense, that has challenged Haftar's authority, that gave him an ultimatum of 72 hours in 2017 to pack his bags and leave. It was an army that has tried to assassinate him, that he has tried to assassinate. It's an army that, quote unquote, Haftar in 2018 faked his own death because he was unsure of which of his commanders he could trust when he was lying, quote unquote, in a coma in Paris. So, you know, it's a mess what's happening in eastern Libya. It's a mess that has been very quietly put to bed and that no one really speaks about, but it is a mess nonetheless. And it leaves us in a very precarious situation because, you know, Haftar, it could be the problem that Haftar leaves, that there could be so many more problems in eastern Libya, because this is also a Libyan Arab Armed Forces or a Libyan National Army, or an army that has fought amongst one another over turf, that has fought amongst one another over the scraps of Libya's eastern economy. So it's not one that has, you know, shown itself that to bind around the doctrine, you know, and it tells us a lot about what will have to be done by the international community. There's a real problem. I started off by this by saying that, you know, this is like 2011 all over again. 2011 was a walk in the park in comparison to the problems that Libya is now dealing with. Libya is dealing with many of its citizens with post-traumatic stress disorder, many of its citizens that have lost their homes, many of its citizens that are now continuing to lose their homes in eastern Libya, in western Libya, sorry. But many of the new fault lines that have emerged as a result of this, socially, politically, tribally, ethnically, are much worse than what happened in 2011. The most significant problem, I would say, is the falsehood of the project that Haftar embarked upon with his backers, with the UAE and Russia, which was this establishment of an army. You know, it's not even, you know, what Haftar tried to, it's not even what Gaddafi tried to create over 40 years. And, you know, a tribe or a tribal structure masquerading as an army. This is, you know, this is thugs and militias on steroids. There are militias in Tripoli. There are militias in western Libya. There are militias in the south of Libya. But for the most part, they're called militias, and rightly so. And they cannot masquerade as anything but that. But in eastern Libya, that behavior that term army, we call it in Arabic jaysh, jaysh and shurta, jaysh. All you'll ever hear is police and army, being banged on across by Haftar and his backers. But the reality is these are thugs with badges on. These are militias that have led the most atrocious gutting of Libya's sovereign wealth in eastern Libya, embarked upon massive bank heists in eastern Libya. So it's there are problems that we have to kind of recover. The social fabric that has been demolished by Haftar over a series of wars since 2014, that needs to be healed now. But the reality is that the West and Europe, as Jalel was saying earlier on, doesn't have skin in the game, doesn't have credibility. It has lost, and I should make this very clear, the UN Security Council and Europe, the European Union specifically, has lost so much good faith with Libyans. It is a joke now to even try to emerge without being able to say, I'm sorry about what happened last year. The last SRSG for the UN, Ghassan Salama, in an interview with NPR around 6 or 7 days into the offensive, made a very glaring, or rather a huge statement in one of his interviews. He said, Libyans need to understand this is not 2011. In a sense, nobody is coming to save you. Antonio Guterres on April 4th, when he was visiting Tripoli, the chief of the UN, when it was attacked by Haftar, the capital, when he came to launch national reconciliation talks, an inclusive, peaceful process, a democratic roadmap for the country, that he has now, Haftar offered last week in Cairo, the very same things when he's losing. When Antonio Guterres was in Tripoli and the city was being attacked, he didn't even mention Haftar's name. They've demonstrated that the UN architecture to resolve conflict has been broken, and the EU was not even relevant throughout many of these conversations. Now, it tells you that if they want to rehabilitate their image as this honest broker, how did they do that when they were ambivalent for so many months, for 14 months, ambivalent to what Haftar was doing, and now they speak the language of peace? I think many Libyans will want to reframe that conversation, and there should be. I think Libyans should be honest enough to know that their own shortcomings, their own problems, and their own steps in creating these and exacerbating these problems, because if Libyans didn't want to fight, then they wouldn't be fighting. But we should also accept and have uncomfortable conversations, be it with whoever wants to have that conversation, or whether they want to have it or not, perhaps I should be saying, whether it's in Europe or with the UN itself or with the West more broadly. But they gave them the ways and the means and turned their back on a country, to their shame and to their discredit, to turn back up 14 months later and say, should we get back to business in Geneva? It's a joke. The UN needs to come out and talk about this. They covered over a joke of a last peace process in Sirte when it turned out that the last SRSG, Bernardine Leon, was in negotiations for a $30,000 contract with the UAE Diplomatic Academy during a period of negotiation and an end to hostilities that the UAE were involved in. And this was something that people just moved on because nobody talked about. So there are some glaring omissions here, a lack of credibility on the behalf of the honest brokers that Libya needs, and a real problem with the West probably soul-searching right now, the UN Security Council soul-searching right now, looking for an opportunity to rehabilitate its image in Libya. But that vital credibility, that vital currency of trust has been missing from many of the parties that are now pursuing Haftar into eastern Libya. My view of it today is that the local parties will most likely, again, as the Minister of Interior, Fathi Bashagha, said, will most likely stop at Sirte. But in terms of Libya's problems, in terms of Libya's conflicts, they will continue. If I have to start, making prophetic statements here, a year from now, there will still be conflict in Libya. Mark my words. At the subnational level, absolutely nothing is being resolved. There are absolutely no rules to the game, whether it be war crimes that are being committed in Tarhuna, or whether it's a legacy of issues that pro-GNA forces left from 2011 with Tawargha or in the south of Libya. So we should also be balanced enough to understand that it's behavior that creates problems, not sides, Haftar or otherwise, but these things left to fester. The ambivalence of the international community with dealing with those problems has exacerbated it to the point where it can no longer even play that role of honest broker. So regretfully speaking here, the alarm bell should be ringing, and they should be shaking people in Brussels, in Geneva, in New York, that they also have to wake up and realize their own role in this. And I should make it clear, it was the UAE that was starting this process from 2014. It was Russia, again, like Jalel has mentioned, that entered here late. But I think the UAE caught on to something that we're now talking about now. Europe is there for the picking, and Europe is there for the kicking. if it doesn't like it. And Turkey understood that game 6 years later. You don't have to knock on the door and ask for permission. You go in and you assert your natural military strength if you deem it so, because Europe has lost the ability to play moral campus. And it also has absolutely no leverage because its own systems, its own structures are broken now. So as far as they're concerned, the one thing the UAE has shown is that spoiling wins. That if you spoil diplomatic processes, you get somewhere. That if you assert your military strength and you break arms embargoes, you commit war crimes, you get somewhere. But that is a very, very dangerous world and a very dangerous new reality that we're creating in a new ground, in a new theater, only kilometers away from Europe. So I'll leave it there for you, Enes, and looking forward to the question and answers later on.
Thank you, Enes. Thank you very much. Now I would like to move to our third speaker, Ahmed Sewehli. He is a Libyan British activist. You heard the other speakers. What is your perspective? I mean, in terms of Libya, how do you see the future of Libya, and how do you see also the current situation in Libya?
I think I agree with Enes about Haftar not becoming as important, but he was a very important player, and he was chosen in particular. I think many people are unaware of Haftar's background. Now, Haftar, he was an officer in Gaddafi's army. He was chosen for the 1980s campaign against Chad, which was a meaningless campaign, but that was Gaddafi at the time. Let's not forget that France was trying to support Chad against Gaddafi's military campaign. Now, Haftar was captured by Chadian soldiers with thousands of his men. I have been speaking to people who were in that conflict and were conscripted as doctors, for example, and they explained to me how Haftar, I'll just give you this example, when he heard that in Benghazi medical school they needed a cadaver, a body to use for medical purposes for students, he shot a Chadian prisoner dead and sent him over to Benghazi. That's the kind of person he is. When he was captured, we understand that he was abused quite severely. And he festered in a Chadian prison until the United States did some kind of deal with Chad and the French to take him over, or maybe traffic him, if that's the word, to the United States, where he stayed there for decades until the revolution started in 2011. Now, Haftar never forgot how Gaddafi left him to rot in a jail in Chad, and he felt that the Libyan people did not care or acknowledge what he thought was his role and his patriotism in trying to defeat Chad. And so from that day, he hated the Libyan people and he hated the country of Libya, which is why he was picked to do what he has done not today, but what he's been doing over the past 6 years. Never would you have ever heard Haftar in the past 6 years say anything like, "Oh, I'm very sorry that there have been civilians who have been killed," or "I'm very sorry that my own soldiers have been killed," or "I'm very sorry what families have been going through." And that is because of his psychopathy. He is unable, he is incapable of saying anything like that. He is unable to even talk about peace, which is why when he read his declaration with El-Sisi in Cairo recently, you could see it was as if it was some kind of a 7-year-old reading a piece of paper and he cannot read. He was finding it extremely difficult to talk about peace. So he had his role. His role was to, if it needed, to destroy as many Libyan cities as necessary and kill as many thousands of people as is necessary for the UAE and France to basically get what they want, which is to be highly influential in Libya. And what did happen then, of course, was that the Russians were always there in the background. We saw Haftar, I think it was a couple of years ago, sign an agreement on a Russian warship across the shores, in the shores of Libya. The Russians decided, right, okay, this is our chance, and in we come. Now, that has been a problem for the rest of the world, as in America, NATO, Europe. Both Jalal and Enes spoke about how the Europeans have really found themselves irrelevant, to be honest. As a union, the European Union, they have been having difficulties over the past year or two because of France's role and France's quite, what can I say, basically clear intentions to make Libya part of its remit, maybe. And again, France had found a kind of hole there where the British had pulled back, possibly because of Brexit. The Germans weren't really involved in the game, as Enes referred to it, and the Italians were quite weak, and maybe in the beginning were in a way supportive of the GNA, but with the change in government and after Salvini left, we found how they made some big mistakes on their part, because they are now not trusted by either side. And so France thought, well, it's my chance. Let me get what I want. And you may have seen some of the WikiLeaks, the emails to Hillary Clinton, where the reporter to Clinton was saying that the French were, quote, playing a game with the Eastern tribes. This was in 2012, 2013. Also, the first government, not the first government, sorry, the Transitional National Council, which was during the time of the revolution, just after, the French had said to them basically that they wanted 35% of oil revenues, and they didn't get that. And so French went in for it militarily. Now they find that people are against them, and they've been lashing out. They've been lashing out since Turkey got involved in Libya at the request of Libyan government. I just want to comment a little bit, which people tend to ignore or maybe weren't aware of, is that like in 2011, the militias in the west of Libya and in Tripoli, who are from various cities from around the country, those who fight, they will tell you, you can interview them, you can speak to them. I've met many of the injured in my role as a psychiatrist. And they will tell you that they will continue to fight because they want a free democratic country. And you will have noticed that today and in other Libya events, that is rarely spoken of. It is as if Libyans are not capable or not deserving of having a free democratic country and shouldn't even speak about it. Whereas everywhere else in the world, when you have activists, or you have people protesting, or you have people fighting for freedom and democracy, people are speaking about it, analyzing it, the journalists will report it. It is not happening, and it's very hard to understand why. Well, probably it's because of the narrative and the narrative war, which the UAE is definitely winning along with France. So one of the reasons why Haftar took 3 years to control Benghazi, 2 years to control Derna, and 1 year of massive war against Tripoli, and was not able to control it, was because the fighters on the ground were fighting for a principle against Haftar, and that was they did not want another Gaddafi. They do not want another 42 years of dictatorship. Yes, I agree with Jalal that probably there is this sense of victory, and there will still be problems, and there may be infighting, it may be political. Hopefully, it won't be militarily, but that's natural. But people must understand that the people of Libya, many of them, are willing to die for a cause. There's nothing wrong with that. And when they found that they couldn't do it alone, and that there were 6 or 7 countries stacked up against them, and I'm happy to list them, and you've got France, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, even the Sudanese government after this revolution, in quotation marks, they've been against the GNA. All of them, by the way, saying that they recognize the GNA, but are happy to be at war with the GNA. So when it came to October, November, December of last year, and again, fighters who I spoke to were saying in Salah ad-Din district of Tripoli that they could see the Russians, that they had precision laser weaponry, which was killing them, that they needed the help, they needed military help. And I can tell you, it wasn't easy for the fighters, and I'm sure it wasn't easy for the government of National Accord in Tripoli to go and ask for help, that it cannot do this alone. It cannot protect the people of Libya, and it cannot protect its own civilians. Let's not forget that UAE drones, and this is in all reports of whether it's Human Rights Watch, whether it's the United Nations, UAE drones hit a migrant facility in Tripoli, killing 53 people and injuring countless others. They hit a military academy, and this military academy, these were students who were just learning their books, basically learning the theory. They were aged between 18 and 21. Over 30 of them were killed in just one strike. A biscuit factory, 8 people, including I think some foreign workers, they were killed in one strike. When the Libyan government went and met with their colleagues in Turkey and asked for help, and they signed the agreement, and the Turkish parliament ratified that agreement, those UAE drone strikes stopped, saving countless civilians. Not one other country in the world came and did that. They were all appalled by the death of civilians. They were all appalled by the UAE drone strikes. They all condemned it, but nobody did anything about it. The Libyan people want to live and have a prosperous life and not have any war, and Turkey has come to its rescue. Now, after the drone strikes, what happened was that in the last few months, there were the Grad missile attacks, and there was deliberate shelling of hospitals, including a COVID hospital, Al-Khadra hospital, which was treating COVID patients, and patients had to be evacuated. People were killed in their homes. There were areas which had no military facilities at all, yet they were struck by Grad missiles. And the reason for that was to terrorize the people of Tripoli and to make them understand that Haftar wanted to take Tripoli and that they would pay for it if they do not give Tripoli up. It did not work. And slowly but surely, the Russians mercenaries, the Sudanese mercenaries, and Haftar's gangsters, if that's what I would describe them as, and maybe as Anna said, probably, they are thugs. They were pushed back. The more they were pushed back, the less Grad missile attacks were. I've been speaking to people in Tripoli today and yesterday, and they are still saying how great it is not to hear bombs falling on Tripoli. Just that in itself has been a fantastic experience for them. And this must continue and should be supported by all countries around the world, rather than saying, how do we replace Haftar? What do you mean? This is like saying al-Baghdadi has been killed. How do we replace al-Baghdadi? The LNA has been committing the most atrocious of crimes. And what we've seen in Tarhuna and Tripoli is just the tip of the iceberg, because a lot of stuff has been happening in Benghazi and Derna, and I don't know if we will ever know about that, because thousands of people have disappeared, including women. We are aware of them. We don't know where they are, and we might never find out. Let's not forget that Haftar militias went and kidnapped MP Siham Sergewa, a lady who, let's be honest, was never with one side or another. However, she did at one point say that the war had to end. And just saying that in the Tobruk parliament meant that she had to be immediately kidnapped and most probably has been killed. You'll not find any Western government talking about that today. It is as if it has never even happened. The West has lost credibility, and I'm talking about the West, mainly Europe. The British have kind of taken a step back. The Americans, to be honest, have been, surprisingly, quite supportive of the Libyan people. Maybe it's not the Libyan people. Maybe it is because of the Russian intervention, of course. However, they have supported Turkey, and they are the ones who are making the strongest statements these days about Haftar and the UAE and Saudi Arabia, without actually mentioning those two countries. But the war, for it to stop, what needs to happen is, first of all, there needs to be justice. I was just hearing today how a United Nations panel or group has been looking into the ISIS crimes and how they are going to be prosecuting ISIS commanders and anybody who's been involved in the atrocious crimes that were happening in Iraq. That needs to happen for Libya. When that happens, then there might be some credibility to the United Nations. If you speak to any Libyan person on the street in Tripoli, they'll tell you they'll have no faith at all in the United Nations. And Anas already alluded to one of the reasons, and that was, of course, Bernardino Leon. Politically, let's not forget that 200,000 people from the east of Libya have been displaced, are in the west of Libya now. They have fled their own homes. Why those 200,000 people cannot be part of a political process, we don't understand. They would want to go back to their own homes. They are very much part of Libya. We are all part of Libya, east, west, and south. The discussion has to be all-inclusive, and it mustn't be between people who say we want a dictator on one hand and a democracy on the other hand. If we were in Europe or in America, that discussion would never take place. There would not be a debate about, oh, wouldn't it be good to have a dictator? That is highly insulting. It is highly patronizing, and I think Europe must change its stance now, immediately, to gain any credibility in Libya and for future negotiations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sewehli. Now I would like to move to our last speaker, Talha Köse from SETA Foundation. Talha, yeah.
Thank you, Enes. And thanks for the other.
Welcome. I mean, you heard the other speakers, and the last speaker, Ahmed Sewehli, he mentioned that some people think that the Libyans doesn't deserve democracy, and some kind of dictator in the east of Libya is something normal. And also, I mean, the other speakers, they mentioned the role of United Arab Emirates and also Saudi Arabia. And I think there are two competing perspectives here in terms of Middle East also. I mean, one is that the Middle East run by dictators without no democracy at all, and which is very much the history of Middle East, much of the history of the Middle East. The other one is a perspective that democracy with the elections and with the democratic institutions. And why do you think Turkey, I mean, has intervened in Libya? What is Turkey's goal in Libya? And also, of course, at the same time, I mean, things has changed in the last year in Libya dramatically. What do you see the future? I mean, the other speakers have speak about the role of the European Union, the absence of, a strong role of Europeans, and Mr. Jalel Harchaoui, he said Turkey and Russia are the two realistic actors in the field, but the others are not really much so. Do you share these ideas? And I think these are my questions. I would leave the floor to you.
Well, thank you. So most people actually try to understand Turkey's role and Turkey's position. And I think we have to take three actors' involvement in Libya is, in general, game changer. So one of them, we have to understand United Arab Emirates. We have to understand Turkish position, and we have to understand the Russian position. Of course, they see the situation from very different perspectives. However, most people do really not understand Turkey's position in this regard. So how Turkey got involved in this issue is very important because maybe until the early February, the Wagner troops were inside Tripoli. So the city was encircled and many other cities fall into control of Haftar coalition. So Turkey's involvement, Turkey's military coordination and drone attacks really changed the nature and nature of the civil war in Libya. So despite all these difficulties and the strength of the coalition that is supporting the Khalifa Haftar, why Turkey got involved in this issue is very important, because we have to understand. Of course, from the beginning on, from the Arab uprisings, Arab Spring, Turkey supported popular revolutions and popular democratic change in the region and in actually all parts of the Middle East. So any kind of popular movement, democratic movement, was considered as better than military dictatorship in that regard. So people may question this, may ask question. However, without this pressure from the popular side, there was no positive change in the direction of democratization and further involvement and a more inclusive government in the region. And regimes are focused on their survival rather than providing economic and political interests of. So Turkey made this choice. Turkey was in the side of the revolution, and Turkey was in the side of democratic change, and Turkey was consistent in that policy. So many of the earlier revolutions, we can consider them unfinished revolutions, failed. And with the help of UAE, Saudi Arabia, and some of the Western countries, they also had some stakes. Those revolutions failed, and in some places, like Egypt, military dictatorship had been replaced by others. So Turkey's position was clear in this side, but despite all these positions, Turkey refrained from involving in Libya because, Turkey was overwhelmed with the civil wars in Syria and Iraq, and there were serious, clear security issues, security concerns for Turkey, especially with the advancement of ISIS and PKK, and also the tensions between Turkey and Russia, Turkey and Iran were sensitive issues. So Turkey was overwhelmed actually in its deal with Syria and Iraq. So why Turkey involved in this issue is very important, because there was increasing interest in Eastern Mediterranean in gas and oil competition. So with the leadership of the some European countries, so Greek Cypriots, UAE, Qatar, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and of course Lebanon, Syria have been involved in a gas forum. So of course this was a important coalition, although the purpose of this coalition, so we should keep UAE and Saudi Arabia out of this Eastern Mediterranean gas forum. But the gas forum was formed against the interest of Turkey. So France and then the US also joined this gas forum. So, and actually the maps that are provided by Greece and the other actors were encircling Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean. They don't even leave space. They just keep Turkey in the Antalya Gulf. So this was a very aggressive encirclement, and it was a containment of Turkey in the region, and it was a very holistic effort. So Turkey considered this as a very serious threat in the long term. So in order to counter this policy, Turkey formulated its blue homeland policy, blue homeland doctrine. So although Turkey has strong cultural, historical, and geopolitical ties with Libya, one of the key incentives for Turkey to get involved militarily in Libya was the encirclement of Turkey by a coalition. And even France and also US was also involved in this coalition. And they tried to keep Turkey out of the geopolitical game in the region, not just in the Eastern Mediterranean, but also in the broader Levant region. So this was a very sensitive issue, and Ankara takes this very seriously. So one of the incentives behind this is this encirclement. The other thing is that Turkey's successful encounter in Qatar crisis. So as you know, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates tried to change the regime in Qatar. They tried to boycott with the help of GCC. And this effort was countered by Turkey's involvement, Turkey's support for Qatar. Of course, Turkey's military base in Qatar was key for the prevention of regime change. I think this was very important. I think the GNA people took this seriously, and this was an important example. So I think that was one of the incentives why they invited Turkey. So Turkey come to Libya with the invitation of the GNA. so legitimate government. And Turkey's early success in Somalia and earlier success in Qatar, and also earlier success the countering the terror triangle terror circle in Syria played significant role in GNA's involvement, GNA's invitation of Turkey. I think that's also another issue. So, so with the invitation of GNA, Turkey got involved, but of course, on the land border, Turkey tried to counter encirclement by PKK in the eastern part of, Euphrates. Russia was involved in the western, in the western part, Russia, in the eastern part, US was involved. So I think that's the sense of encirclement was very important, and military capacity was important for Turkey to break. And unfortunately, NATO did not play any or EU did not play any constructive role in countering Turkey's fundamental national security issues. So the reason why Turkey got involved in Libya in such a enthusiastic way is the feeling of encirclement. Of course, Turkey has economic interest with Libya, especially some contracts during the Gaddafi period, economic interests, and other geopolitical interests. But that was very important point where Turkey decided to take responsibility and take risk. So, and also Turkey's, game played significant role. But we also have to understand why UAE and other game changer actors played a role in Libya. So definitely UAE was counter-revolutionary. They tried to legitimize their involvement in the region by trying to counter any actor, any popular actor, any democratically change. So their main objective was counter-revolutionary. They tried to suppress popular revolts anywhere in the Muslim world, including in Somalia, in Malaysia. They tried to destabilize any of these countries and also help to suppress these regimes. So, so UAE, by using the pretext of countering Islamism or countering extremism, actually they sponsored, supported all these extremist actors, and they tried to topple the legitimate government. I think, and they considered Turkey as one of the significant obstacles to their counter-revolutionary plan. So Turkish, they are doing their best in the last 5 years to destabilize Turkey, doing all the efforts in both West and in the region. And I think they see Turkey as a big obstacle to their region. And also, they're also trying to control some of the ports. So by destabilizing, fragmenting some of the countries like Yemen, Libya, they want to have weaker central governments and control some of the ports with their smaller, allies in the region. I think their fundamental objective is to create weak or dependent actors in the region so that they can control some of those ports and expand their power. So, and also Russia saw opportunity, actually window of opportunity. On the one hand, UAE invited them, they supported, sponsored them, they paid them a lot of money, and it was an opportunity for them to get involved in the southern flanks of NATO. So being present in Libya would give them significant geopolitical advantage. So they didn't want, they really did not want to lose this opportunity, and also some step towards their encounters, their policies in the Africa. So it was a great opportunity for Russia. They want to expand their position. They want to fill the gaps and vacuums that are provided by Europeans and the US. So it was a golden opportunity for them to get involved in Libya so they can destabilize NATO, they can destabilize the region. So actually, if you look at the, in general, frozen conflicts are great for Russia. In those conflicts, they extend their power, they keep their troops, and the fragmentations in NATO, so between Greece, France, and Turkey, fragmentations within the EU with the involvement of Greece, France, and Turkey, and also competition between maybe German position, Libyan, Italian position, French position, allowed them to get further involved in the region. So actually, it was a golden opportunity for Russia to get involved and expand their control in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And I think they will stay there too. They will try to find some permanent position, permanent, access to the region. So unfortunately, all the diplomatic processes were used to actually legitimize Haftar, provide opportunities for Haftar. So under these conditions, so it is clear that Libya issue is very much connected to Turkey's broader strategy in the Eastern Mediterranean. It is strategy to support popular elected governments, and also it is part of its strategy to expand oil, natural gas exploitation in those regions, as well as economic cooperation, as well as So, but the fundamental issue, I think, is the breaking the geopolitical encirclement of Turkey. That's why Turkey was willing to take such a risk. So, I would like to talk about some of the, I think, the scenarios. I mean, what may happen. Of course, it is a possibility that there may be a frozen conflict. So we know that the attacks may happen in Sirte, and GNA may take over Sirte, and also there may be attacks in the Jufra, which may also get further involved of Russia. However, even if GNA takes control of Sirte and Jufra, this issue may continue as a frozen conflict, and Egypt and Russia and France may keep eastern part of the country as fragmented. So that is one scenario. The other scenario may be further escalation. So the encounter in Jufra and the inside of the Libya may lead further escalation, and even in that escalation, Turkey and Egypt, Turkey and Russia may get involved, which may be dangerous because it may be an issue for NATO involvement as well. And also, the best option definitely is a diplomatic solution. So, for a diplomatic solution, there should be an understanding between Turkey and one of the actors from the pro-Haftar coalition. So Turkey, if comes to an understanding with, Egypt, I think that's very sensitive and critical issue. So of course, the Libyan actors come together, but also there should be an agreement and broader understanding between the coalitions as well. Or, Turkish-Russian involvement and agreement is not sufficient to bring sustainable stability to Libya. So I think one of the key stakeholders is Egypt, and I think UAE will continue to play, spoiler role in this conflict, but that may be also another game changer for diplomatic solution. It is interesting that NATO and EU are still hesitant to get involved. They don't even play constructive role. Of course, if they, we know that France, plays a role. They want to instrumentalize EU and NATO to extend their interest. Unfortunately, because of French involvement and Greek involvement, those two institutions cannot play more constructive role. But I think if if we leave it to the NATO, I think, or EU, they have more capacity to play more constructive role. So we have, the things is still in the middle. We may have positive, negative, and or frozen, alternatives. So, but what will happen between the major stakeholders, especially I mentioned three major actors, so UAE, Turkey, and Russia. If two of these actors can reach a broader agreement, I think, and also convince the other actors, this may also change the direction of the situation in Libya. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Talha. Now we have some questions. You can see these questions, but I would like to also read them out for our viewers. There is a question directed to Mr. Jalel Harchaoui. So, do you see that Russia can have a long-term presence in Libya on the borders of Egypt and the European Union? There is another question directed to you. Do you believe that the collapse of Haftar and his collapse of Haftar will cause tensions, reprisals in the east, especially if some of the estimated 250,000 Eastern Libyan refugees return? Another question, it seems EU countries such as France, Italy, Germany have different political agenda in Libya and no consensus. There is no consensus on the field. What do participants think about European countries' stance in Libya? There is a question of what is the, can Turkey win against Egypt? But I don't think that's so simple because there are other actors, but Egypt is also one actor here. Do participants see a chance for a convergence between Turkey and Italy, especially on the GNA? Also, a critical question that lurks in the background is what Libyans want. One of the viewers asked. Unfortunately, it seems we have considered the answer to regional international actors while we parrot a call for a civilian state. So, another question in the same direction: which side Libyans are supporting by a majority in a relative comparison to GNA and Haftar? How will the Turkey-Egypt relationship will be affected by the developments in Libya? Is Turkey trying to court the Sisi regime to move it away from the United Arab Emirates? These are the questions. Also, I would like to ask you one question, Mr. Jalel Harchaoui. You mentioned Russia and Turkey as realistic actors on the ground. And especially the Western actors, European actors, but United States as not so realistic. However, you mentioned also that they have left the ground, the space open for these actors, right? Especially United States, what we are seeing, Russia is playing a role in Syria or in Libya because of the United States, I think, it allows them to do so. So, and there is a rationality behind this also. Don't you think so? Do you really think that all the European position, France, Italy, and it's not realistic? And that's also my own question to you. And we would like to start with you again, and then we'll continue with the other speakers.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm going to start with this, the importance of the U.S. attitude. This all began with the aftermath of one of the largest strategic disasters in U.S. history, the decision to invade Iraq. And what happened starting in 2006 is the realization in Washington that it was maybe not a very good idea to go in. And this actually started mattering in the sense that the U.S. allies in the region became convinced that we were never going to see another moment where you would basically have 180,000 troops going in the Middle Eastern country. And that certainty, knowing for sure that it's not going to ever happen again, it's really the kickstart. Like, it's what the beginning of this philosophy of trying to find another structure to oversee the Middle East, because the Middle East has been overseen by some kind of entity for the last 600 years. There was always someone that felt kind of responsible for how the various capitals should operate. So the decision to go to war in Iraq is really the beginning, and another big event is, of course, the decision on the part of Barack Obama to let Mubarak basically collapse. Those are the two traumas from the perspective of the Gulf states, for instance, and that helps you understand why the UAE is so interested in kind of filling the gap. Here, what matters is the attitude of the Europeans. The Europeans themselves have always known for the last 75 years, they've always seen the world through this guarantee of being under the US umbrella, security umbrella. This, again, same idea. You have an entity above you making sure that everything is okay in terms of how the geopolitical architecture is designed. And the Europeans are not able to accept. They know that the US is in the process of leaving. That's a very slow process, very ambivalent. It's not a straight line, but it began in 2006 and it's going to continue for many, many years. But the trend is clear. And if you want to understand the relationship, for example, between Paris and Abu Dhabi, it's very helpful to keep that in mind. So in general, the Europeans are not used to have to take care of security issues in their vicinity without that overall structure. And they're trying to improvise. And that's the reason you see all that disharmony between European states, incapable of agreeing even on basic things like Irini operation in the Mediterranean. It's not being implemented very well. That's just another illustration. So so this was basically the, and ideologically, they don't have an ideology. Like in 2011, when France and Britain and the US went to Libya, you still had that ideology of liberal democracy or liberal democratic idealism. That this idea that it should be everywhere on earth. If you have an opportunity to topple a dictatorship, it's a great idea, you should go in, and then rebuilding the state will be easy, we don't have to worry about it. That was the thinking back then. Right now, there's a shortage of ideology. You have a portion of Europe that is illiberal or anti-liberal, like Hungary, and you have, and when Hungary is anti-liberal, it means that you have Salvini in Italy in 2017, 2018, and then you have also this sentiment in every capital. Some decision makers are liberal and some other decision makers are anti-liberal. You could argue, for example, that a lot of the decisions on foreign policy here in France are more and more anti-liberal. So as long as you don't have an ideology and you don't know what you're trying to achieve, then it's very difficult to be a realist. To go back to that very interesting question about Russia's presence, the first thing somebody will, I mean, if anybody interested in answering this question, is Russia going to stay in eastern Libya? The first question you should ask before trying to address this one is those Panzers, you know, how many Panzers have been floating around in Libya? Like you've had 9 at least being destroyed, probably another half a dozen or more. So that's 15 Panzers, and each one has cost how much? You know, officially, it's $15 million, but it was probably bought at a discount. Let's, you know, call it $5 million. Who paid for all of this? Do you think Vladimir Putin is going to put one red penny for his Panzers to be destroyed in Libya? Obviously not. So somebody else must be paying. What I'm trying to say here indirectly is that a lot of the commercial service that has been delivered by Wagner, which is hybrid. It's not completely commercial, but it's commercial. And although it has a link with the Kremlin, it still needs to be paid. The Russian state is not going to pay for any of this. You can be absolutely 100% sure. So who's paying for it? This cash flow has, you know, you know the answer. I don't need to say it. But this flow of money is going to continue because at the end of the day, it's a useful set up. You know, Russia will continue getting this option of making political decisions thanks to this physical presence that was acquired in the form of a commercial service that it didn't pay for. So you can see that the model can continue like this forever because the Gulf states are not going to be able to build the geopolitical and security and military expertise of Russia overnight. So that, for that reason alone, you could be sure that Russia is going to effectively stay in eastern Libya, because it doesn't cost anything to stay. In general, it's very I think important to recognize that Russia has all the time in the world. We are used to actors who are very much in a hurry in Libya, but Russia is different in the sense that it's getting, it's being rewarded with the passage of time. I'm not only talking about the money, but also in terms of political sway and political influence. Everything keeps, it's like a virtuous circle. All it has to do is show up effectively and do a few things that don't cost any money, and that leads you to actually noticing that Russia, when it thinks about a theater like Libya, it doesn't want to build a naval base next week. The naval base will probably cost it too much money, but it needs the option. It's building options, and this is a slow process. As I said, there's no rush. And what it needs is to make sure that over the next 15 years, let's say, the whole strategy makes sense. And if somebody helps it stay in the picture, knowing that it also has probably the intention of building a commercial connection with the GNA, now that the GNA is surviving, yeah, what's not to like? So, definitely, I would be absolutely betting on the fact that Russia is going to stay. Regarding the tensions, I think, I would go back to what I was trying to say. The figurehead, this image, the visible image of being able to say that officially, technically, the field marshal is still in place, even if it has lost a lot of its political meaning, the figurehead is still in place. When it collapses and when it goes away, because at some stage it will have to happen, then I think we'll see a new wave of tension, because as long as the billboard is still valid, I think a lot of players are not going to show their cards. They're going to stay and continue with business as usual. When the billboards will have to be changed, then when that event happens, I think we'll see more glaring fault lines, reappear in a more brazen way in across all of those eastern cities, especially Benghazi and Ajdabiya, I would say. I think I covered I don't want to speak too long, so I was happy to answer those 3 questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to move to Enes Gomati. And are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. So welcome back. So the questions, you have heard the questions, and also you can see them. And please share with us your response.
Well, I mean, there's many places to begin. I think, I'm sort of apprehensive around, and I think I want to pick up on just one minor subject that we do kind of gloss over. But it's striking that we're talking about, this ideological battle, this battle of ideas in Libya, at a moment like this where, people are discussing only in the last 4 months the merits of authoritarianism because of COVID-19. We talk about the merits of strong states like Russia and China and the UAE to be able to lock down, in the drop of a penny, really, to be able to do those things. And we often forget that, number one, it's authoritarianism that was, the root of the opaque, kind of very quiet way in which they divulged information around the spread of COVID-19. And now it seems like I'm diverting, but I'm coming back to this point. But it's also around this notion of only within a few months, despite all of this kind of, so what I'm looking for, this Faustian pact, is it our health or is it our liberty? Ultimately, despite the fact of how lethal COVID-19 is, you've seen across Europe and the West huge mass demonstrations, unlike anything I've seen since Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Madrid, Occupy Athens, Occupy Dublin, Occupy London. All of those movements that coincidentally took place during 2011, during the Arab Spring. Those people are back outside, risking their own lives, risking transmission of disease in order to assert their own liberties. And I think, it's interesting because we give them credence and we often, applaud their ability to take the streets. But when Libyans or other Arabs in the region fight against a return to authoritarianism, we often gloss over it. We're often quite apathetic. We often think, please, nothing to see here. And we laugh about it. And I think even in private circles, in think tank circles, in circles over, over dinners with other people, I see how ambivalent they were when we've had these watershed moments. Before, we've had a watershed moment only a year and a half ago with the killing of Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul. Something that many Libyans can relate to, given the degree to which Libyan dissidents were murdered overseas for 30 years, 40 years under Muammar Gaddafi. So it's something that I think we forget because we're not often in touch with Libyans. And when we ask questions like, how popular is Haftar? How popular is the GNA? I think it's silly for us to return to this idea, of a cult of personality. And I think there is something that is quite dangerous and pernicious with the way that the UAE, in particular, have tried to obsess around this cult of personality. If you look at the billboards, as Jalel was rightly pointing out, in Eastern Libya, this is such a throwback. I mean, it's so outdated. The idea that, people will kind of turn around and look at billboards and really, think somehow this is the solution to their daily problems and their daily needs. Again, I'll go back to the ideas of what's happening in Eastern Libya. Authoritarianism is really brittle. We forget that these kind of regimes that are being built or are trying to be rebuilt, they're often like the story of Humpty Dumpty. Once something is broken, it's difficult to put it back together again. But we should remind ourselves about how brittle authoritarianism is, at least even in Eastern Libya, where it fell apart in 5 hours 9 years ago on February 17th, 2011, when a group of women, predominantly women, went to the courthouse in Benghazi 2 days before the revolution on February 15th and protested. So, it tells you that authoritarianism as a model is kind of outdated. The idea of a cult of personality is, there's something about that psychosis when one wants to proliferate it and ship it all over the world. And it tells you that it's not really appetizing, or it's not really, there's no real method of building that in Libya today. I think it's outdone. Libya needs a pluralistic kind of system in order to cohabit. I mean, that's really where Libya is through different regions, different ethnic groups, different groups of ideas, different ways of looking at the world, lots of different problems that have emerged out of this conflict. And it needs a system that can absorb that, a system that is resilient enough. And authoritarianism, contrary to popular belief or the belief that many people have us think that it will work, it doesn't really work. And I mean, it mobilized so many people in Western Libya to fight that. What it tells you is we need systems and processes. We don't need people or personalities. Fayez Sarraj of the GNA, despite what many may think about him or not think about him, is not going to be Libya's solution. In the same way that, Khalifa Haftar is not going to be the solution. I'm not going to be their solution. My granddad wouldn't have been their solution. My great-grandchildren won't be their solution. It's a joke that we often discuss it in terms of trying to find that person. I mean, if we were going to look for a person today in mind, we probably need a Mandela. I've said this so many times because we need someone there that can often help us open that chapter up for reconciliation. But look at South Africa, 20 years, 30 years on, 30 years on, my God, time flies, but 30 years on, South Africa is still a deeply divided nation and it still needs work. And so I think it's beyond any one person, but I do find it striking that we speak in those terms. And I find it striking that we proliferate the idea of somehow this dichotomy of, well, can authoritarianism work? Can we put Pandora's box back into it? It's not going to happen. I think it's laughable. I would say that, what motivates, and I think what motivates a lot of the actors there in terms of what they're willing to concede on in terms of negotiations. There's, I'll come on to this last question about partition later in a moment, but just in terms of the motivations of a lot of the actors there, it tells you that they, Libya is a very dangerous member of the Arab Spring coalition. Because I don't want to deviate too far away from democracy and what it means to Libyans. Forget about that for a moment and ask yourself what democracy means for autocrats, for monarchs, for wannabe dictators, for hard men like Sisi or strong men like Sisi, and for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, who is the architect of this counter-revolutionary wave that Jalel and Taha and also Ahmed have spoken about. But really, as an architect, I would say he's the most invested. He's much more invested than his counterparts anywhere else in the world. that are looking at the Arab Spring or looking at Libya. And I would say because Libya is a unique example of a country with massive resources, natural wealth and resources in the way that the UAE is, a deeply tribal and divided society in the way that the UAE is. But it's also one that, if it became a democracy, would become an oil-producing democracy and would be one that is an example for others in the Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia, the UAE, potentially even Qatar, even though it was the one that really supported the Arab Spring, but in particular the UAE and Saudi Arabia in the way that they want to proliferate these ideas. They feel a real deep fear, an existential fear of the Arab Spring that Qatar in its own system, in its own policies doesn't necessarily feel, but particularly these two countries, they have really invested deeply inside Libya. Now, Egypt, the saying goes, you know, when Egypt sneezes, the region gets a cold, right? So I guess in that sense, there was a deep investment in Egypt, but it was an overnight investment. Despite all of the setbacks for the UAE, they're still there. 6 years going strong. They have investments that will go over Haftar. And I think, despite the fact that we can talk about Haftar in so many different ways, I respectfully disagree with what I've heard in the rest of the panel. I think when it really comes down to it, there are two things that are important. Number one, there's a million Haftars, that can be bought out there. There's a million Haftars that you can activate, but there's probably one person like MBZ. And I think we should focus our attention on looking at someone like MBZ and deeply asking ourselves what kind of solution would work for him, or how can we inoculate or stop the UAE from really asserting itself in the way that it has. And I'd say Turkey seems to be the only counterweight in that sense, and has ripened the UAE perhaps towards looking at a meaningful diplomatic settlement. But I would even say that they've spent so much that that's going to be difficult, and that the existential threat is so large that they will stand at nothing to stop a return of authoritarianism in Libya. Or, and I would mention this, that the solution for them looks like either Libya becomes Egypt, which is now more authoritarian under Sisi than it was under Mubarak, or it becomes like Yemen, which is, the more you try to become a democratic or a pluralistic or a civilian state, and we shouldn't negate their democratic credentials, they've tried. Some of it is a systemic failure. A lot of it is also the investment by outside forces to stop that transition from taking place. But it's now a basket case. Syria is a basket case. These countries have been destroyed from internally. It's a kind of a scorched earth policy. So Libya's kind of options are become like Yemen or become like Egypt, but don't become like Tunisia. A successful civilian-led government, a successful transition of power in the region. I think that's a dangerous set of options there, but it's certainly one that we have to look at and bear in mind. And we have to understand the motivations of those countries. It's not just the mercantile kind of ambitions of MBZ. It's not only the economic ambitions there. There is something that is ideological. We haven't moved on from that. And I think we have to start to address those things there, because they're meaningful on the ground. Because as much as MBZ won't give up, it also seems like Libyans won't give up as well. To move on to this idea of partition, dangerous. I think we can look at the STC in Yemen and see an example of a country that partitioned the week that Haftar launched the coup in eastern Libya and was failing and retreated back to eastern Libya. Today we have a de facto partition of Libya. We have two different currencies in Libya. Grace of and thanks to Russia for bringing in $10 billion worth at least of counterfeit Libyan dinars. We have a foreign embassy. We have different foreign ministries operating in Libya. We have one that enjoys relationships all over the world in Tripoli under the GNA. And then we have one with literally one diplomatic mission that is inside Bashar al-Assad controlled Damascus. So we have to remember, and I think even potentially Athens, though I'm unclear about what the exact coordination is today in Athens, but it could be possibly there as well, given it's the relationship or enmity towards Turkey. So I think we have to understand that we're kind of moving very, very dangerously towards some peculiar, perverse form of separation and partition, which would never be accepted by the international community. Though I'll eat my hat, I'm sure, one day for saying this, because get in line behind the Kurds, get in line behind the Palestinians, get in line behind everyone else in the region. There is nothing unique in terms of Libya's regions or in terms of Libya's differences. There are shared cultures, there are shared languages. It's a very cohesive, or it was otherwise a very, very cohesive country where people can often live together but can be instrumentalized. So I would say that, you know, Libya is moving dangerously towards partition, but it kind of leads me to my final statement, which is, if you look at the problems that Libya has, how many of them could have been sorted from the outside? How many of Libya's problems need to be sorted out in Tripoli or Benghazi, or probably have to start out in Geneva, in Brussels, you know, or in Washington, or probably more likely from those three capitals? There needs to be pressure applied to Abu Dhabi, to Cairo, to Moscow, you know, and to a host of others, including France and Paris, rather, you know, and Amman to a certain degree, but you know, and to you know, to so many others that are now involved in asking them, given that Libya has had countless opportunities to build a normative peace, countless opportunities, diplomatically speaking, to move beyond war and open a new chapter. Why have those countries, you know, enforced or broken and violated the arms embargoes? What will it take for those countries to stop offering Libyans like Khalifa Haftar the ways and the means to continue this conflict? Because without those countries, Libya would have had a peace process years ago. And so I should make it clear that there are certain responsibilities that we can put on Libyans because they've also chosen to fight. Today in Tarhuna, they've made the choice to do those things, but they had diplomatic guarantees, immunity from the outside. They felt absolutely no pressure towards stopping those things, and they had, crucially, the military means and ways to continue this, an endless supply of ammunitions. And if they got bored of fighting or tired of fighting or needed a fag break, there'd be some Syrians or some Russians or some Sudanese or even some Turkish deployed Syrians there fighting for them on their behalf. So it's a joke today to assume that Libyans can do it on their own. And I think we really have to start applying a lot more of the framing of this question and put it back on the West and put it back on Europe. When is Europe going to be ripe to have peace in Libya? When is Europe going to be ripe to sort out and fix a broken UN Security Council, a broken European Union that with a single French veto in the European Union or a single veto by France or Russia can destroy years of work that has been done by Libyans, where it was ready for them in 2015, ready for them to open up a new chapter, but was destroyed within a single vote, probably even a threat of a vote. So that's how thinly veiled and thinly kind of constructed a lot of Libya's mediation plans are, and a lot of what kind of continues and allows for the the propensity for Libya's conflicts to re-emerge at any moment. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Enes and Gomati. And I will continue with Ahmed Sewehli. Are you with us? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So just before I forget, I just want to mention, I was going to mention Tunisia before Enes said it himself. What I'm seeing in Tunisia, and I'm following it quite closely, and there is a particular MP called Abir Morsi. I can swear on the Holy Quran, basically, that what she's saying now is exactly the same words that we used during the Haftar beginning in 2014 and 2013, when the UAE was getting involved in Libya politics through Mahmoud Jibril and his party, the National Forces Alliance, to destroy the parliament and democracy politically. They're using exactly the same techniques, the same words. I saw a protest yesterday. It's exactly the same stuff. It was, oh my God, the Muslim Brotherhood are going to take you over. It is dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And I'm telling you, it's like they've been given the same script. So I'm very worried about Tunisia. Although, of course, Tunisia is different in that it does have a majority, well, or a significant Muslim Brotherhood parliament, let's say. However, in Libya, that is not the case. Yet still, we had to go through this. You are Islamists, you are terrorists, you are taking over, etc., etc. And of course, the terror that we did see was what we're seeing now in Tarhuna and what we saw in Derna and then what we saw in Tripoli with the mines. Don't forget, in Tripoli, mines are killing people every single day, whether that be people from the soldiers from the Libyan army of the government of national accord who are trying to demine people's houses and they're being killed, or it is children and families being killed when they go home against the advice of the government. So that's just put Tunisia. In terms of a question about Italy and Turkey, I wouldn't be surprised if Italy is trying to do a deal with Turkey and is trying to get him on board after the big mess up over the past few months. However, it depends on how much France and mainly their colleagues in the Emirates are willing to bribe Italy to not support the cause of the GNA. Now, what should happen next in Libya? I think people again tend to forget that the GNA is called it's the Government of National Accord. It is a very weak government. Why is it a very weak government? Because it was of national accord, i.e. there was this peace process in Sirte, which took a long time, a lot of money, a lot of resources from the West, from America, from everybody who was involved in Libya at the time, including the United Arab Emirates. And it was the United Arab Emirates who agreed, I can tell you that they agreed to the appointment of Faiz al-Sarraj, who was at the time a member of the Tobruk parliament. So they agreed to al-Sarraj becoming the president of the presidential council, and there were members on a presidential council who were basically Haftar's men. And for that reason, the government did not take any action against Haftar and his advances and basically the UAE conspiracy against Libya, because UAE had some of its men, or Haftar had some of his men on the government in the GNA. Even now, we look at the ministries in Tripoli. They are basically they're absolutely incompetent, to say the least. And that is where we need to start and have a look at. So I've had a go at Haftar. Let me have a go at the GNA at the moment. The GNA has been incompetent. Its foreign ministry has been just about non-existent. I think Enes was referring to the diplomats around the world. For example, we have a ambassador, the Libyan ambassador to Washington. She has been very quiet since the attack on Tripoli by Haftar, and we believe that is because she is a pro-Haftar. She's a Haftar supporter. London embassy, we don't even know who the ambassador is. The embassy in France, the same thing. So what we need to do is a restructuring of the Libyan government, and how that occurs. We're not saying we need to go to elections immediately, because that would fail. Even if theoretically the GNA took control of the whole of Libya, it would be practically impossible. It would be something that will be needed in the next year or two. At the same time, it is only right that just as we are against Haftar's authoritarianism or any other authoritarianism from the Tobruk parliament, the so-called parliament, because it really isn't a parliament. It's nothing about democracy. It's as much a parliament as was the Reichstag in the era of Hitler. They just rubber stamped whatever Hitler decided, and that was also been happening in the Tobruk parliament. And as I said, the consequences of that, if you don't rubber stamp it, even if you just basically say let's have a think about what Haftar has suggested, then you end up like Siham Sergewa. So I don't think elections would be practical or practicable in the next few months. However, there needs to be some kind of body which holds the GNA to account. We don't have any press conferences. We don't have any politicians and political committees asking Sarraj or asking the Minister of Health, for example, in this COVID era, about what is happening and what steps they have taken and why. We don't have any of that in Tripoli, and that's part of teaching ourselves, teaching Libyans how democracy works. It's not about the ballot box. It is about accountability. It is about checks and balances. So back to what happens next. We're going to have to see what Russia does in Sirte. I think Russia has now been exposed fully about. I understand what Jalel was saying about the commercial aspect, and that Russia's enjoying that, is happy to play the long game. But they are seriously involved, and in Sirte it has been held back. We think that there are some talks between the Turkish government and the Russian government. No one wants any more bloodshed. How this ends in a peaceful, non-violent way, because it is going that way at the moment. Let's not forget, at the moment there isn't much of a war at this minute in time, and that is solely due to Turkey's assistance in pushing out Haftar and the Russian Wagner group from Tripoli. So hopefully that diplomacy can continue. It is for the EU and the United Nations to not start a peace process. We had it in Sirte. It was all agreed. However, the UAE and Haftar backed out of it, completely ignored it. There were no consequences for them. Therefore, nobody, I think, will trust any kind of new peace process in that manner again. It is about how we reinvigorate the GNA at the moment, but make sure at the same time that it is held accountable and there are checks and balances, and possibly decentralize power in Libya in a fair way. And I'm not talking about Haftar's fair way, but talking in a way which makes sure that all Libyan people basically are represented in a new state of Libya. But we need to do it. We need to do it slowly, and we need to do it step by step in a thoughtful, planned, structured way.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. And now we would like to move to last speaker, Talha Köse. Talha, are you with us? Yes, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll briefly comment on a couple of things. I mean, unfortunately, now the liberal language in conflict resolution has been abandoned, and some of the discussion we mentioned are, accountability, democratic participation, all these things. Of course, Libyan people want this, but unfortunately, the stability in Libya will not come with a broader, participation, dialogue. These are necessary, but there should be some kind of balance on the field. So one of the biggest obstacles is still the disagreement between the foreign external actors. So although the vulnerabilities are still there, so although there is some kind of peace deal, the vulnerabilities of Libyan context will continue. So it's a weak and fragmented society. So due to Gaddafi legacy and even further fragmented during the civil war, weak state apparatus, I mean, non-existent at all. I mean, not so functional. So security sector is very weak, and all the other, infrastructure is missing. And also there's the competition between the major actors are still going on. So although we can talk about some kind of agreement, those vulnerabilities will continue. I think long-term involvement in Libya is crucial, and there will be lots of spoilers within this process. So we should be optimistic about the end of the conflict, end of the civil war, but reaching a sustainable stability is a much more complicated and much more layered process, which needs to be designed. So I don't see that kind of incentive, that kind of consensus. So what we're going to have at the end probably is one of the actors, one of the sides will, win and try to institutionalize their role in a more decisive way. So I think there is more role in international community for the moment. I mean, they should provide some, support in the Libyan process. So the fragmentation does not seem to be, ending anytime soon. And United Nations somehow should find a way to get into the Libyan context. So even if the parties may stop fighting, it can emerge anytime. The fighting may return at some point. So this is a dangerous situation. So there are deep structural vulnerabilities of Libyan society, Libyan politics, and there needs to be long-term engagement. So yes, now we're talking about the civil war, how it's going to be ending, but even after a deal, we will continue to discuss how to stabilize Libya and how to prevent further fragmentation along international lines. Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the contribution. We came to the end of this panel. I would like to thank all the speakers once again for their participation. Mr. Harchaoui, Talha Köse, Enes Gomati, and Ahmed Sewehli, thank you very much for your time and for this fruitful discussion. And I would like to welcome our viewers to our next panel, hopefully quite soon. And I would like to thank you once again for your participation. Thank